Alright, hi everybody. Online people, we just watched this YouTube video. And yes. How's it going? Glad people are back. I realize lots of people are out. Okay, Mendelian genetics. This is where it gets cool, right? So, couple of ideas, and I realize people are sort of intuitively familiar with this. I mean, humans have been around for a long time, and are reasonably bright, and it's been known for a long time that offspring have characteristics similar to their parents, right? Like, this isn't new news. It's been known that certain characteristics seem to run in families. It's also been known that these traits are passed down, right? So, like, if back in the day you have the bestest ever little goat herd, and you're like, oh, this goat has the fluffiest wool, has the fluffiest goat wool, and just gives the bestest goat milk ever, I want to encourage this goat to have baby goats, because I want more goats like this one, right? Like, that's been around for a long time. But how that happens, understanding how that happens is something science has gotten really excited about in the past couple hundred years. So there are two big ideas for how this could happen. The first one is this idea of the blending hypothesis. And on the surface, it makes a lot of sense, but don't memorize this one. The blending hypothesis is the idea that, like, okay, so if my genetic material is kind of a bucket of blue paint, and my mate's genetic material is a bucket of yellow paint, we both pour some genetic material into our kid, poof, they now have green, right? And there's something to be said to that, right? That, like, my children have traits that look like they came from me, they have traits that look like they came from my spouse, right? And there's this nice little blend here. But the problem with this idea is it says that the genetic material that I gave or my mate gave, it got completely switched and changed. Instead of being blue or yellow, it's now green. The particulate hypothesis is the idea that these are handed off in chunks. So instead of having blue paint, I have a bucket of blue blocks. So I hand some of these blue blocks to my child, my mate hands some yellow blocks to our child, and now our child has some yellow blocks and some blue blocks. Does that make sense? Okay, that? So, the particulate hypothesis is the one that's right, though it gets complicated. And we need to talk about pea plants, and specifically about this buddy up there who's got, he's indicated with the red circle, who was brilliant and focused and more dedicated than I probably will ever be in my entire life. Okay, it's the 18-something or others. Mendel is a monk, and he does his normal monkly things, but he's also got this garden there at the monastery. And he decides he's going to figure out how inheritance works. And he does. He ends up actually writing this paper, and, like, everybody ignores it for, like, 50 years, and then they're like, oh crap, he was right. Anyways, also, I love this picture. Can we take a moment to appreciate that these people probably have had, like, one, maybe two photos of themselves taken in their lives? And, like, I don't know if this guy wants to even be here, right? This person is trying to look serious, not looking at the camera. Mendel brought his pea plant with him. I think they probably told them to, like, bring something that's going to show you as a person, right? Like, this person brought the book, he's probably writing a book or something. He brought his pea plant. He's not even looking at the camera. Anyways, I love this picture.
Does he next to him or just staring at him?
You would know. Apparently he was a nice guy, but apparently he was very focused. Which, like, he was. Okay, we're going to get to... Also, brilliant mind. So, I mean, like, I think I'm reasonably intelligent. You could leave me alone pea plants for a very long time before I deduced the principles of heredity on my own. I'd be like, huh, sometimes they're purple. Huh, sometimes they're white. Would you look at that, right? Okay, it gets good. So, Mendel, our dedicated buddy up here, he figured out the basic principles of heredity by breeding these garden pea plants. And he didn't just like randomly do it. He had a very set series of experiments that he did to figure this out. It let him figure out a couple main concepts that we still use now, okay? And he noticed things that like people have been noticing but they hadn't actually figured out why. Also, Mendel figures this all out before he knew about the chromosome being a thing. Like, science didn't know the chromosomes were a thing yet. Anyways, okay. So, a couple terms just to make sure we're all solid. A heritable feature that varies amongst individuals is called a character. So that's something like flower color. It can come in white, it can come in purple, it can come in more than two varieties, right? So something like hair color is a character, right? It can come in white, it can come in gray, it can come in red, it can come in orange-ish, it can come in black, it can come in brown. Okay, hair color is a character, all right? The different variants of that character, those are called traits. So that's having black hair or having brown hair. Everyone's cool with this? Okay. Mendel had peas that were available in lots of different varieties. So he's got pea plants that have different colored flowers, and he's got pea plants that are short and some are tall, and he has got pea plants that come in different colored seeds, right? Beyond having a lot of different kinds of peas, anything that makes peas pretty good at doing breeding studies, like how come he probably had access to cows? Why not use cows or people? It takes a long time, right? If you try to do genetic experiments with elephants, it takes elephants, like 2 freaking years to have a baby. Like they're pregnant for like 20-something months. It's a long time, right? Don't do that. Also, he's not trying to use oak trees that take forever, right? Peas are great. They've got a short, it's called a generation time. So if you plant some peas at the very, very beginning of spring, you can have another generation. Maybe you can even have a couple generations before winter, right? You can have lots of generations. You can also, one pea plant can have lots of offspring, right? Lots of individual seeds to make lots of baby pea plants, right? Whereas if you're doing this with humans, besides for the ethical reasons, like, you're not getting hundreds and thousands out of one couple, right? And another thing you can't do with humans is whole controlled mating situation, right? With pea plants, you can very specifically determine their mating. So we skipped pretty much all of the plant sexual reproduction portion of your chapter because we've got things to do, people. Timing was tight. But briefly, we're going to just pretend that we're going to keep it super basic. Plants can sexually reproduce, and they can sexually reproduce with themselves or with other plants, typically. I mean, so we're talking like the true flower here. So this flower has a female portion of the flower. It's like the egg. It's got like a gamete. And it's got a male portion of the flower that produces pollen, like sperm, right? And if you get the male portion of the flower, the gamete, from there with the gamete of the female portion of the flower, you can have a seed, right? You can have this new individual. If you want to control that, you certainly can. And this has been done for centuries. You can cut off the male portion of the flower, you can cut off the stamens, and have basically just the egg of this plant remain. And then you can take the pollen from a different plant, so you can take basically the sperm from a different plant, and put it in, it's not called sperm, but are we okay with this idea here? And you can have a cross between these. So you can have the female part of the flower and the male of a different flower, and they can have a new offspring. We're okay with this? Okay. It's been done a bunch. Some terms. These plants here, the ones that we're looking at, the first generation, they're called the P generation for parent. Okay, so they're the parent generation, the P generation. Their offspring, so once they have so the plant's called P, but once they have P, the new Ps, it's very challenging because we've got P for the generation, they're P plants, and they have Ps. But once they have Ps, new P plants that grow up to be these little P plants, those are called the F1 generation for the first generation, right? The first son generation, so the first child generation. Everyone solid on this? Questions? Okay. So, a couple things Mendel's going to be doing. Some characteristics come in lots of different versions, right? Hair color, eye color, whatever, right? Mendel decides that he's only going to track characteristics that come in straight up two distinct alternate forms. So he's not asking people like, which one is the most tasty, right? Because there's a huge variation there. He's looking at things he can tell, yeah, it's purple or it's white. It's tall or it's short. All right? He's also, to start, he's going to use varieties of pea plants that are true breeding, which means if this is a true breeding purple plant, if you grow up this purple plant, if it self-pollinates, all of its children, right, all of the seeds that come from it, all of those ones grow up purple as well. The children from those ones all grow up purple. Those ones, they all look like themselves. They true breed for purple, right? You can also true breed for white. So the other pea plant, it's got white flowers. If it self-pollinates, its offspring have white flowers. If that self-pollinates, its offspring has white flowers. Everyone's with me here? So they're true breeding. So in the typical classic experiment that he's going to do, he's going to cross two true breeding plants. This one, you've got one that true breeds for purple. You've got another one that true breeds for white. P generation. You're going to cross those. Right, you're going to have them mate with each other. This generation here is the F1 generation. And then you're going to have them, let me go through to lots of words, to here. You're going to have those cross either with themselves or with, I should go back, sorry, here. You're going to have those of this generation, they're going to cross with themselves, right? So you can either cross them like this or you can self-pollinate. Is everyone okay with this? When you have this F1 generation cross with itself and have baby pea plants, that's now called F2. It's the second generation down, right? So you can have their parents, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, right? You can have P for parents, F1, F1's offspring's F2, and it goes on F3, F4, F5, etc. Everyone's cool with this? Okay. So, this is super beautiful. He does this, and he realizes when he crosses true breeding white plants, that they always just, if they cross themselves, they always have white. With true breeding purple plants, all of the F1 hybrids, all of the F1 generation, they're all purple. White just disappeared. It's gone. Poof, right? Okay. But when he has that F1 generation cross with itself, the F2 generation, white comes back. Alright? And it's weird. It's weird because this is what happens, right? So, true breeding purple plants, purple flowers, true breeding white flowers, crossed, F1, white's gone. You don't see any purple, so you don't see any white flowers, they're all purple. The F1 generation crosses amongst itself, and he counts these because he is focused. He counts 705 purple flowered plants to 224 white flowered plants. Alright? Also, he has amazing notebooks. Like, he was organized with this, which is phenomenal. We actually need to look at some of the other things he looked at. So he looked at flower color, but he also looked at some other characters. So, online people, we're going to briefly take the ratios of this slide and this next slide, and we're going to talk about it. So if you want to, on your own, to go ahead and calculate what it is, you can do like 705 divided by 224. Okay, in class, people, this is what we're doing. Do you all have phones? You can do it by hand, I realize too, but like, fine. So what we're going to look at, and Mendel did this too, but he did it by hand, is look at the ratio of, we're looking at the F2 generation. We're looking at the ratios of these things. So purple to white, there's 705 to 224. So that's going to be 705 divided by 224 equals 3.15. Does somebody want to do seed color for me? Yeah, I mean, you're like, yep. It's 3 point something, but it's basically 3, right?
Yeah,
Cool. Okay, seed shape? Great. And moving on. Pod shape. So then he's got these 7 different characters he's looking at. Okay, pod color. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Beautiful. Flower position. And stem length. Okay. Online people, if you've done this, and if the class has nicely done job, anything you notice about this series of numbers? They're all really, really similar. And can we just take a moment to appreciate the kind of dedication it takes in somebody's life to count 5,470, 5,471 of different kinds of peas? Can we appreciate this? Okay, so he does all these ratios, and they come out at 3 to 1 for like all of the stuff. So true breeding plants, which is going to breed true, it's going to breed true for their different traits. They're crossed. One trait disappears completely. It's gone. And then the one that's gone in the F2 generation comes back a quarter of the time. There's 3 of the ones that happened in F1 and 1 of the thing that we saw in the parent generation but lost in that F1 generation. Do you see this? So Mendel reasoned a bunch of this out. He realized, okay, he was calling them factors. We're going to say with colors just because it's easy. There's some factor that's affecting flower color in F1 generation. He called the thing that's the purple flower color, because that's the one that shows up in F1 generation. He called that the dominant trait. And the white flower color he called the recessive trait, because that one disappears in that F1 generation. But the thing that's making white flowers didn't get destroyed, nor is it somehow diluted, because in F2 generation, it's back. He looked at a whole bunch of things. Mendel was calling these heritable factors. We call them genes. But he came up with this beautiful, beautiful model to explain this. And it works. And it works, it describes what we know about genes and chromosomes, and the man did not know about genes or chromosomes. He just reasoned it out. We're not getting through all of it today. We're going to get through some of it. Okay, and I realized, so on a computer screen, the blue shows up beautifully, it's really bright. In the projector, it's not so good. I'm sorry, I need to go back to doing other colors. It's trying to be original. Okay, the first thing that he reasoned out, or the thing that makes sense to explain first, is different versions of genes, he's calling them heritable factors, different versions of genes account for differences in the inherited characteristic. So, the gene for flower color in his peas came in a white version and a purple version, right? They're both for flower color. They're both at the same spot on the chromosome. He doesn't know the chromosome part yet. But they come in two different versions. Those are called alleles. It's actually, used to be called allomorphs, but they're called alleles. It's just different versions of a gene, right? They're going to account for different, they're going to account for variations in these inherited characteristics. They're going to account for the traits. We're cool with that? Mendel doesn't know this portion, but you do. So on a chromosome, there's a given gene that has the code to make this enzyme that makes purple pigment. So if you have this code and you're a pea plant, you make this enzyme, and this enzyme goes around and just builds this pigment, okay? If you have this, you're a purple pea plant, right? So far, so good. There's a version of this gene that the first part of the code isn't quite right, and so you don't actually make the enzyme. So you have the code, it's almost exactly the same, except this first spot's changed, and the enzyme does not get built. So you don't have an enzyme to make purple pigment, so you don't have any purple pigment in your flowers. With that, we're going to come back to this just a sec. This happens at elevators. It happens more often at crosswalks. You know, they're in a crosswalk and you like push the button, and the next person comes up and they saw you push the button, but they're like, I will do it too. Okay, right? But like, to be fair, I do this too. I'm like, maybe yeah, push it right? Okay. Or if you're in an elevator, right? You push floor 3, and the next person comes and pushes it again, even though it's lit up around it, right? If the button for floor 3 is pushed, the elevator is going to floor 3. If it's pushed once, pushed twice, doesn't matter. It's pushed, it's going to happen. Okay? In this scenario, if you have two versions of the gene, so if you've got two alleles that say no enzyme for purple pigment, the flower's white because there's no purple pigment floating around. If you have two versions that make the purple pigment, then the flower's purple. If you have one version of the gene that says make purple pigment, so you've got one allele that's like this and one allele that's like this, it's like just pushing the elevator button once, you're still getting there. Having one enzyme to make purple pigment is enough to color the flower purple. Fair enough? Questions, concerns, comments? Okay. So he's reasoned out, not the gene part, but he has reasoned out there are different versions of this, there are different versions of the gene, right? Next, he's also figured out, okay, an organism's getting two alleles. I'm going to keep using the term alleles because that's what we call them now, but an organism's getting two alleles, and this organism is getting one from each parent, right? Again, sorry, I keep harping on this. I am just very impressed with his ability to figure this out. The alleles that the organism gets, this F1 organism or any organism, the alleles it gets, they might be identical, or they could be different. So In a true breeding plant, the um, the plant gets an allele that says purple from dad, and they get an allele that says purple from mom. So they have two of the same versions. And so when they give one to their child, they're giving purple because they only have purple. They got two purples, right? It could also be true breeding for white. Or you can have different versions of alleles. You can have one of one type of thing and one of the other type of things. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, you can have the same versions, you can have different versions. Third, and this is where it starts getting interesting. If the two alleles are different, right, then the dominant one explains the organism's appearance. And the recessive one, the other one, doesn't have a noticeable effect on the organism's appearance. Right? So in a flower situation, the purple flower is the purple allele is the dominant one. Questions about that? Okay. Briefly. A side note into random analogies that I actually thought of ahead of time, so I put pictures on. And only one of them has to do with food. Okay. Anybody here in high school, middle school, grade school, play a very noisy instrument? Yeah, what'd you play? Clarinet. Okay, yeah, that's solid. Anybody else? Flute. That's actually a fairly quiet instrument. I mean, you could get going. Okay. Trombone? Whew, yeah. Tuba, okay. Which is great, but it's kind of noticeable. If someone's like going for playing tuba, the whole house kind of knows. Fair enough? Okay. I had a cousin who lived with us for a while, and he played the baritone, which is fine, that's great. All for him doing this. He wasn't that good, but he was very enthusiastic. So, okay, great. So you've got one roommate, kid, child, whatever, who plays a loud instrument. Great. I looked up online. Apparently the quietest instrument is this thing. I can't even pronounce its name. It's like Qudong, something like that. It's this Chinese instrument that has silk strings that you pluck. It's apparently very beautiful, but very quiet, right? Okay. If both these kids are happily playing their instrument in their house, right? What do you hear? You're gonna hear the tuba, right? That's the one you hear. So if you were standing in the front door listening, and you'd hear the tuba. This does not mean that the kid who has the tuba has like beat the kid that doesn't have the tuba over the head with it and like tied them up in the corner, right? This does not mean that at all. Okay, with that? They're both doing their thing. If you had two kids playing this beautiful little instrument, you'd hear it because it'd be quiet enough to hear that one. We're cool with this? Okay. Similarly, does anybody know what this very mean-looking pepper is called? It's a Carolina Reaper pepper, which honestly, this is how nature says do not touch, personally. Has anybody had Carolina Reapers before? Okay, yeah, don't. I had one person in the 9 o'clock class who was like, I did once, a tiny bit in jerky. It was terrible. This is, like, the hottest pepper that we have. It basically melts your face off just by looking at it, kind of. Oh, not really, but yeah, it's like, yeah. Has anybody here had, like, I don't know, ghost peppers? Yeah, okay. They pack a punch, right? Like, these are the next level, but they do pack a punch. Whereas if you had them, you start questioning your life choices, like, what have I done to get here, yeah? Yeah. My brothers, I have 3 brothers. Fantastic people, love them dearly. They ate peppers just to see if they could sometimes. I don't know, I was like, screw that. Anyways, whatever. Okay, so, peppers. If you've cut these into little chunks, and you've cut 2 pieces of bell pepper, and you eat 2 pieces of bell pepper, you're like, oh, a delicate bell pepper flavor, right? If you eat 2 pieces of Carolina Reaper, it's like, all I taste is my face melting, right? Okay. If you have one piece of this and one piece of this, all you taste is still, my face is melting. Okay? That's not because this bell pepper ceased to exist, though. It's still there. Okay? Sorry, I realize I'm harping on this, but it's a common misconception, which I didn't believe until I started teaching biology. It's a common misconception that the dominant allele, somehow, I don't know how, but somehow, I guess the idea is that this dominant allele lives in the cell, sees the recessive one, and, like, stops it from working. Ties it up in the corner, is like, haha, I'm in charge here. It doesn't. DNA is not self-aware. This dominant allele just does its thing, making whatever protein it's supposed to be making. The recessive one just does whatever it does, making its thing, or often just not making its thing. And they both just do their job. So far, so good? Questions about this? Okay. Yeah, that's actually about right. So, just to make sure we're all on the same page. I realize some people have heard this, but I realize lots of people haven't, but lots of things happening. Okay, sorry, let me get back to going through things super fast. Okay, here we go. Sorry, I got like one slide off between these two, and now I'm very confused. Here we go. Okay, so just to make sure we're all clear on this thing. This P generation that we see in this thing, they're true breeding. If you cross these true breeding plants, the first generation, the F1 generation, they show the dominant trait. Then, when you have those F1 organisms cross with themselves, the F2 generation, you end up with 3/4 dominant trait, 1/4 recessive trait that you can see. All right? Oh, tune in next week to find out why. All right? That's what we have. Remember to take your lab exam if you have not done this. It closes tomorrow at 1, I believe, 1:30, something like that. Okay. Oh, today's Friday. Huh, it closes today at 1? Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm so confused sometimes. It closes today at 1. Take it. Yeah, gosh, good. Okay, I'm glad it's Friday. For some reason, I don't know what happened. Okay, take your lab exam. You'll do great. Take your quiz. It closes at 11:55 p.m. tonight. Yeah, thanks. Gosh, okay. It's a good thing it's Friday. It needs to be Friday, but yeah.